how is the world of team blockchain, first of all? Because I think for people who don't know you, the sign on the advert for this one is Johnny Fry Team Blockchain. What's that all about?
Well, basically, we set the business up in 2016, and it was really to try and make sense of, how do you spell blockchain? What does it mean? And at the time, there were either the complete naysayers, or it was just people being evangelical about it. And it was all like literally hallelujah, bow down to the sort of chapel.
Can be a bit culty, can't it?
Yeah, crypto nonsense. So what we tried to do is bring a bit more pragmatism, a bit more of a commercial aspect to it, and get rid of the, quite frankly, bullshit. And all they wanted to talk about was, oh, the unbanked. And yeah, it's worthy causes, but the reality is that wasn't really, going to change the dial on, a shop in Norwich, or, an asset manager in Scotland. And what we were interested in trying to identify, was it real, and how, where, and why would you want to use the technology or the digital assets? So that very quickly meant that, and we didn't want to be techie geeks, so it meant that we started running educational workshops. You've been to a couple of them, Chris, in the evening, with accountants and lawyers and corporate brokers, and we were trying to case study how, where, and why you use it, or perhaps you don't use it, and what some of the limitations are, but not in a techie way. It wasn't designed for cyberpunks. It wasn't designed for the geeks. It was designed for the decision makers, of why they ought to start looking at this. And then that gave birth to Digital Bytes, which, as you know, is the weekly publication, which goes out to literally all over the world now. We've got clients in France and Catalan and China, and they reproduce it and translate it. But really interesting. And this is, if you're ever sending big documents, try WeChat. We sent a half an hour of videos a couple of weeks ago to China in less than a minute.
Wow.
Really impressive platform. And the reason we know about that is that the Chinese client sends out, because you can't email people in many parts of Asia, not just China. The firewalls are all over the place. But you can do almost anything you like with WeChat. So they translate it into Chinese and then just send it out. And the Chinese, what they want is they want what's going on outside the firewall. A lot of information is filtered. And so they're just in, and as you know, we're not trying to sell anything in Digital Bytes. It's just pure information. So they quite like that. I'm intrigued as to why they get frustrated because they can't click on the links though.
So it's a bit like pirate radio then.
Yeah, it's a bit like, that's true. That's true. So yeah, that's and this year, we're picking up a steady.
And then, so the inspiration for Team Blockchain, was it built in the years of hedge funds and all the other city careers that you had? I mean, I won't ask you to do a name in Andrews, but what you did have a hedge fund that obviously.
No, I never did hedge funds.
Okay, got that wrong.
I basically set up a mutual. They're called mutual funds. At the time, they were unit trusts, and now they're called OICs, open-end investment companies. So they're not full of Chelsea people, being a bunch of OICs, but that's a different story. We basically got Brewin Dolphin. We bought their unit trust company, and that had a range of funds here in the UK, and then had some funds out in Luxembourg. And it was managing people's ISAs or PEPs, personal equity plans they were then. So we were managing, so all the funds that you see advertised in the papers, we were one of those. And so the reason that...
Was it fun?
Yeah, it was, but it's just full of city people. And 99%, as you well know, Chris, of people in the city, they're only in it for one reason.
Yeah. Money. Loads of money.
It is literally loads of money. It doesn't serve any higher moral social purpose. It's all about money. And that's sometimes just
sell their grandmother, their mother, their daughter, their cousin, whoever they could sell to make money. Yeah.
And there's a lot of people, so that's why we set the business up in Guildford. We never had an office in London. So the business was always in Guildford. And basically I'd run that for 20 odd years. and stopped managing money years ago, as we got people far better than me to actually, lose money. That's just, that's the way we did it. And we had some successes along the way, and we got involved in sort of structured type products, and we set some funds up in Luxembourg, set some funds up in the States. But after 20 odd years of doing it, kind of just want to do something different, because
change. And then, with your, again, going back to the blockchain hat, the commercialization, would you say in the sort of 5 years that Team Blockchain's been going, we have seen an adoption? And in that light, are we ahead? Are we in line? Are we behind what you were perhaps saying in 2016?
Well, you've got to be a bit of a muppet to answer that question, really, haven't you? Of course, blockchain's here. It's a bit like saying,
but look, again, Johnny, there are people that we talk to regularly, especially when, if you look at it from our perspective, when we're advising businesses, we do pre-seed to Series A. You've got a lot of, I suppose, angels in that space, and actually seed VCs who are just like, blockchain, don't touch it. Don't understand it. Don't touch it. Won't invest in it. Don't like it. It's literally, and you kind of think, well, we're quite a strong barometer of companies in the that ecosystem. And if the people, if they're pushing back on it, you kind of think, well, how are these different? Okay, we're not the all singing and all dancing, but how where are these businesses growing? Is adoption growing? And just where is it growing?
Well, so as you're talking there, what it reminded me of is, I can remember very clearly my IT director coming to me and saying, we ought to have a website. I'm going, why? We've got a company brochure. And that was sort of late 90s. And you've got to have an email address. Why? What's wrong with letters? And I got my secretary, I literally used to dictate to when I came back from London, a whole load of meetings. And blockchain is a little bit like that at the moment. People saying, why do you want to bother? But because the pace of adoption is so much greater these days, not just with this technology, but just across the board. And so anyone that seriously says, well, what's happening with blockchain? It's easy. All you've got to do is just put in blockchain plus retail, plus, I don't know, supply chains, plus insurance, plus asset management, plus radio. I don't care what you want to put in, and you'll find probably one of your competitors is doing something with the technology. But it's not about the technology. It's more what the technology enables, because a lot of the blockchain, because that's the other thing, people think it's the World Wide Web, it's the blockchain. No, it's blockchain technology. And there are tens of different types of blockchains. We've all heard of Bitcoin. It has a blockchain. Many people have heard of Ethereum, which is another blockchain. But you've got Cardano, you've got EOS, you've got Waves, you've got Stratus, you've got loads and loads of different types of blockchains, and they're all trying to do slightly different things in different ways. And what we haven't found is a common standard. And some people liken it to the VHS Betamax, which, being a couple of old duffers, we remember. And actually, Betamax allegedly was a better type of way of recording and playing tapes, and recording stuff off the TV and films. But actually, in the end, VHS sort of kind of won, and Sony and Betamax sort of kind of went away. But I don't think we're going to see that with blockchain. I don't think we'll see one blockchain dominate going forward. But I also don't think people are going to talk about it. No one talks about, oh, do you use Lotus Notes or Word? It's just,
I think another good example is like HD DVD versus Blu-ray. Turns out they both had it wrong because we all just went to streaming.
So we look at it more like a skeleton. So think of blockchain as a skeleton, and from that you're going to see hanging off it other technologies, and like IoT, Internet of Things, like artificial intelligence, like machine learning. And what blockchain can do is facilitate that integration of those different technologies. And all it is just an Excel spreadsheet on steroids. That's kind of what it does. It holds data, but the keyword that keeps coming up, and we do, I personally probably about 20 hours a week just just writing about this topic. So it's a bit nerdy, admittedly, but trying to understand it's changing so quickly. But the key word is transparency. And what it brings is much, much greater transparency to systems, processes. And with greater transparency, that brings greater trust. And with greater trust, it can then start cutting costs because you haven't got to duplicate what's already being done. So that's super important in the regulated space of accountants and lawyers and financial services companies, because you can then actually use the technology to give much more transparency over the processes. And then those compliance officers can start focusing on risk mitigation, not box ticking. And that's so what we've seen is the cyberpunks drove this blockchain thing, get around the banks, you know, use it for money laundering, all that sort of stuff. And the whole thing is now turned on its head. And now you've got governments that actually want to use the technology because it can give greater transparency, greater information, and drive some real efficiencies. So look at the World Health Organization at the moment. They're working with Estonia company to create a blockchain powered platform so that you can identify, have you had your yellow fever vaccination?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
You can't go to certain countries unless you can prove that you have been vaccinated with yellow fever. Forget COVID, just with yellow fever. So that's a real example.
I mean, like, surely I would assume that we should be using the blockchain for the, you know, you mentioned it earlier, the COVID passport or the vaccine passport. Is that happening?
Yeah. So you got the International Chamber of Commerce, and then a company called SOS International, which is the biggest medical repatriation company in the world. Something like 2/3 of all of Fortune 500 companies have an SOS policy. So if your staff travel, then you can get them back. So if you break your leg skiing, typically it will probably be SOS that will bring you back. Basically they've got this, it's interesting, the Catalonia de Centre blockchain, which is in Catalan, they've set up their offices. It's a government Quango type operation, set their offices up in Girona, and they've persuaded the city of Girona to actually take on board this blockchain based platform. So you can basically go there with your phone and say, there you go, there's my QR code. And the QR code, that's all it does. And then you read, the scanner reads it, say, oh, Johnny had a test within 72 hours. He can come to the football match. He can come into the restaurant. He can go to the theatre. And it's just one more step. Say, oh, Johnny's now been vaccinated, and therefore he's fine. But if I don't get vaccinated till summer 2022, my QR code will go because we're going to have boosters. So
and the most important bit there is when they scan that QR code, there is no question over whether that is valid or not, or it's real or it's fake or whatever, right? To your point earlier, that is the most important bit about blockchain, right?
And Anthony, I'm not going to share my information. I'm not going to share my date of birth, my inside leg measurement. It's simply,
exactly.
You need to know, am I clean? Have I been vaccinated? That's all it'll show. So, so I think, people get really het up about this, but if you go back in time and look in history, it can teach us so much. Because actually, when we had the bubonic plague, which I know you've struggled with, Christopher, and hence your gross, ugly looks, but that's a different subject. And they actually had guards positioned around Florence, so you couldn't get into Florence unless you proved you had a medical identification. We're going back to this sort of 16th, 17th century, and they said, okay, well, and if you basically disagree, well, we're going to chop your head off. But we would let you in, and they came into Florence, and they had this something they made a funny word up, and it was called quarantine, and it was 40 days and 40 nights, and you went to an inn, and they provided food and drink for 40 days and 40 nights, and as a result, the bubonic plague killed 12% of the population in Florence.
Yeah, same thing in.
Hang on, Milan didn't bother. They had 60% death rate. So this is something which has been around for 400 or 500 years.
Venice as well, right? Venice as well. The same thing. They would make them quarantine on the ship when they came into port for a certain amount of time before they were allowed to come off.
Yeah. So instead of going around bits of paper, we can do it digitally. That's all.
I think the other interesting thing, and about the only interesting thing I remember from my degree, which was modern and medieval history, was that all plagues last 2 years. Did you know that?
I remember you mentioning it at the beginning of COVID.
Every single plague, 2 years. So
Apart from the plague of low, that's been more than 2 years.
the plague of fry, you mean? So
We just exclude
okay.
outliers.
Yeah,
L-shaped curve at the edge.
So then if you look at the sort of corporate adoption here, because I know Digital Bites, I do read it. I know you say I don't, but I do occasionally have the time to peruse through your wisdom. And yeah, there's some really interesting pieces where you pick up on different companies and or situations or stories where blockchain is happening. I mean, has there been a particular adoption amongst other, outside of finance? Has there been any industries that have really started to use blockchain on at scale? Any countries? I'm just curious, that real adoption where the penny is dropping.
Yeah, so again, there's lots and lots of examples. There are certain areas where obviously blockchain powers digital assets, cryptocurrencies. So, and you've seen the adoption of cryptocurrencies. It's a global phenomenon because it can basically move money, much cheaper and much more securely. So you've got places like Korea, South Korea, well, probably North Korea as well, but certainly South Korea. Very, very active in that space. Japan has been a real adopter. But outside of, let's forget money for a moment. Let's look at other use cases. And there's a terminology that we sometimes refer to called collective capitalism. And what I mean by that is that normally in a capitalist environment, companies compete with each other quite aggressively, and you would never go to your competitor and say, we can help each other and we can make it bigger and better, unless you're being a monopoly. But you have situations such as Trade Lens, which is basically being developed by the Maersk Shipping. And obviously ships very much in the news at the moment with what's going on in the Suez. And they've got this platform where they've got 120 different competitors basically sharing information so they can be much more efficient of where they're moving container and information around. All that's run on an IBM have done a lot of work with their particular consulting stuff. They've got a blockchain which they have been propagating. Then you go to the petrochemical industry and you've got a blockchain called VACT, V-A-K-T, and they've done a trial in the North Sea and they've improved the efficiency for themselves and their competitors. Shell, Esso, Total, for example. So there's three of us on this call, and we've got 3 different oil rigs in 3 different places. Well, rather than sending 3 ships out, we can send 1, and I can get more stores of lubrication, and you can get more stores of drill bits, and Anthony get more supplies of pipes. So just 1 ship. Also in the petrochemical industry, one of the companies that we're working with, they actually have an Internet of Thing device, which tells you how much petrol, or in America they call it gas, is actually in the tanks underneath the gas stations. And then it's all linked to a blockchain. So that if we imagine, most people hopefully will be familiar with Oxford Street. Let's just imagine there is a petrol station at Marble Arch, Oxford Circus and Tottenham Court Road. Now, instead of a oil tanker going down 3 times a week to top those up, all of those are connected with an Internet of Things through a blockchain. So it then works out the optimum time. So once a week, 1 tanker goes down and tops up all 3. So that's really good for ESG purposes, but it makes it a lot cheaper. Because you imagine how expensive those tankers are to actually, pay the congestion charge, more importantly, to actually run them and maintain them. So they're rolling that across the states. So that's, again, you wouldn't even know about it. And that's what I mean. A lot of these adoption is going on now where it's kind of a bit passe almost to talk about it because it's happening. And if you don't realize it's happening, well, as I say, just Google it. Just Google your industry you're in, and I think you'll be very surprised. And that's what we try and look on a multi sort of jurisdictional basis. So, we're working with another company at the moment, fascinating company called Blood Flow. And what they're doing is, I had no idea, if you give blood, you get a cup of tea. How much do you think they sell the blood for to the NHS?
A lot.
£147.64 per unit.
Blood pack. Oh,
per
wow.
unit.
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
the trouble is that, you know, we're old boys, and our generation, if the phone rang, you'd say, oh, that's good, someone's phoned me.
I'll do my bit for the country. I'll give blood.
Yeah, but if the phone rings and the kids don't recognize the number, they won't even pick the phone up.
Yeah.
They've got banks and banks of people phoning to say, don't forget, Johnny, your blood donation, or, you know, don't forget it's next week, don't forget it's, and they phone 5 or 6 times to line up the appointment and then phone afterwards and say thank you. So I think 7 times a phone call gets made. Well, that's just old. No one picks up the phone anymore, so they've got to.
If I don't recognise the number, I don't answer it. I'm like, oh, that's a scam. Fuck off. Yeah.
But if you could see that your unit of blood went and saved a little girl in a car accident in Reading, or an old man who had a hip operation up in I don't know, Newcastle, then you're probably more likely. Now, you don't need to know the name of the girl or the old man, but to see how your blood's been used, that may encourage you to come back a little bit more. And now if you overlay the whole tokenomics and the whole nudge economics of, Johnny, every time you give blood, or every time you actually give a referral, we'll give you some Green Shield stamps, we'll give you some points, we'll give you some air miles. Don't care what you want to call them. We'll give you a little incentive.
More tea?
More tea, Vicar. So again, that's being used in the sort of healthcare sector to try and you then scale that up and say, well, okay, unfortunately, the blood donation agencies have something like a 15% drop-off rate. People just don't bother turning up. Having said they will, they don't. So if they can reduce that and get more people to give blood, they'll generate more money, which they can do more marketing, which means, because there's a desperate shortage of blood. Now, on top of that, you've got something like 75% of the plasma comes from one country, the USA. Why?
Yeah.
So what they want to try and do is actually get more people giving blood. That gets separated into plasma, because the one thing that has taught us in the last year is the over-reliance on one-off locations. Something like 65% of all the paracetamols and active ingredients for drugs comes from China. 80% of antibiotics comes from China. And that's not being xenophobic or anti-China, but does that make sense? And I'd argue it doesn't. So
from an efficiency point of view, it makes sense. From a redundancy point of view, it's extremely risky.
So that's
it's quite interesting, you know, hearing all of these use cases. It just, to me, it becomes very apparent the sort of natural marriage between blockchain and AI, because blockchain is just creating very efficient data that is accessible. AI is how you then use that data, right?
Yeah, AI is useful, but very often it's just holding the data. You don't need to do anything with the data, but you want to give permission. So we were asked by the Chartered Institute of Personnel Managers just before Christmas, could we tell them a little bit about how it can be used in their industry? And you know, you're applying for a job and you say, here's my CV. Now I've got a job, so I want my CV back. I want my data back. I want my information back. So you can use blockchain in a way of giving permission to share your information and data. And so that's a really interesting thing. And then I think you have to look at, I mentioned about governments. We've already got China, it's created its own digital assets. And it's really interesting what they're doing, because what they actually said is that, okay, we're going to give away $3 million worth of money, just cash, going to give it to you, randomly selected from different locations, different cities, they've done it. But it comes with attachments. You have to spend it within 10 days. You can only spend it on these certain places. So rather than this crazy situation where allegedly, according to the Bank of America, we have something like $1.6 trillion of savings in the US economy waiting to be spent. On top of that, they just chucked another 1.9 trillion. You know, my sister, you know, she lives in California. She does not need $2,800 for her and her husband. They're just going to save it. Whereas an impoverished football player like yourself, Chris, you know, what if I gave you £1,000, you're going to go and pissed up against a wall. You're going to go and buy beer and go and play. Yeah, probably a new knuckle duster. You're going to spend it. So what a digital currency enables, it enables you to basically target
a much more targeted fiscal stimulus. So yeah, the rules around those resources. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Because they've lost control of money in many ways, because the reason with interest rates as they are, they can't really cut interest rates much more than now. So they've lost that economic tool. Unless we see interest rates pop back up, governments are really struggling. How do we stimulate certain parts of the economy?
So are you talking to our dear Rishi at the moment, Johnny, about any of these kind of areas? Because you are a leading mind in the space, in my opinion. Are the government listening? Are you talking to different departments?
Yeah, yes, but it moves so slowly. That's the problem. And there's so many vested interests. And Chris, you're very kind, but I don't class myself as an expert. I've only been doing this for 5 years.
But blockchain's only been around for how many years?
Since the 70s.
Really?
Remember Napster?
Yeah.
Remember Napster?
Yeah.
That was blockchain. Distributed ledger technology. Technology been around for ages. That's not the issue. The issue is the infrastructure hasn't been there. So I'll share with you a little story. There's a big company called State Street, which I know you guys will be familiar with. They look after only $30-odd trillion worth of assets. So they're one of the biggest sort of
custodian, aren't they?
Custodian, administrator, and fund manager. They've got just a mere 3.8 trillion just in funds under management. And they've been talking about using blockchain for quite a long time. So I know some people there. And week before last, they announced they were going to do the administration and custody for a new blockchain in Canada. And it's a Bitcoin ETF. Now, I just put something on LinkedIn. I've only got 8,500 connections on LinkedIn, so it's not massive by any means compared. We had 33,000 views within 2 days. And when you actually then go in and look at who's looking at it, because you can on LinkedIn, once you've got more than a couple hundred views, it was like walking down Wall Street. The names of the companies that are looking at it and saying, blimey, this is happening, this is going on, this is interesting. And so at the moment, there's still a lot of, we're looking at it, let's see what happens. But as you see central governments, we've seen China, I honestly believe in the next 18 months, you'll see Europe and all the UK come out with a digital currency. Then all of a sudden, that thing of that turning the whole thing upside down from sort of, cyberpunks wearing hoodies and want to get around the banking system to actually the banks and the governments using it. And I think the mass adoption will actually be driven by compliance, not by salespeople. So it'll be driven by people saying, I've got more information, I've got more transparency, I can then focus my limited resources on, fighting what I need to do rather than this box ticking exercise. Because actually, if I'm honest, where has regulation got us in the last 30 years? We still get, they still get criminals, you're still going to get fraud. So actually, it's a bit like trying to fight the drugs war. Actually spend the money in a slightly different way and you probably get a better result. And there's that shift beginning to happen with people saying, we need more information, more automation. Go to Anthony's comment there about using AI to actually look at trends, look at information. It's being used by the banks to grant loans. So they're not just looking at your application, they're using a whole series of information so that they can grant better loans that are have less default.
Yeah. And also credit history accuracy and all that sort of thing as well. The benefits, it's quite interesting because you can go from a very macro to quite micro very quickly when you start thinking about all the benefits.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorites, Chris, and I know we've spoken about this before, is the Johnson & Johnson, who do, cherry blossom blue polish and Glade air fresheners and, all that sort of stuff. And they want to do something for their corporate social responsibility. It's now called ESG. Environmental, social, corporate governance. And they wanted to do something because they got billions of bottles of plastic that are polluting the oceans and everything like that. So we want to do something about this. So they teamed up with Plastic Bank. They said, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to encourage typically non-working ladies and children to go and pick up plastic in Egypt, in Indonesia, and Malaysia, and clean up your village. And we'll give you some money for your old plastic and then we'll recycle it. And the trouble is that dad came home, typically clip round the ear, back down the local whorehouse. Wasn't really what Johnson & Johnson wanted. But all the kids were walking around one of these things, a mobile phone. So they said, well, tell you what, why don't we give them some sort of electronic credit, an air mile, a Tesco's club card point, and then they can exchange those for, for food, for, clothes, for books. And so it kind of circular economy there because you're cleaning up the environment, you're helping, those in real need. And it's all very traceable. So one of the key investments, and you must come across this, how much are you going to make in your new company, Johnny? How are you going to make it? what's your ESG footprint? Well, in order to know what your ESG footprint is, you have to know where you're starting from. So you need to almost do like an audit, and then you're constantly checking, you know, are you staying within your ESG credentials that you've offered? Well, for that, you need data, you need information. And I then need really to be able to share that with you. Not that you get my version. You need to be able to go in and see from a distance, okay, so how are we measuring? Is he a polluter, or is he actually doing what he said he would do? So that's the sort of,
how can we trust that data? Yeah.
So there's a company at the moment, and they selling coffee. And basically you can get your QR code, you can scan it, and you pay a little bit extra, and your money goes to the coffee growers so that they don't chop down the rainforest, and they actually look after the orangutans. And they've rehomed 200 orangutans. Now all that information is on the blockchain. But the story is actually doing something.
What's that company called, just for our viewers?
Oh, it's monkey business, isn't it?
Okay.
I can't remember the top of my head, but again, Google it. Google it. It's there. And that coffee is for sale here in this
monkey
country.
business, blockchain, enter.
Orangutan.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, fascinating insights there, Jonny. We've had a bit of a year of the SPAC, as you probably have been witnessing. Curious, is there a blockchain SPAC out there that's on the horizon, or have there been many?
I thought those were called ICOs, Chris.
Well, you tell me, Anthony. I'm just, you know, you getting bored? You buying into this SPAC hype, or is it just a load?
We're about to get a very substantial stock market crash, Chris.
Okay. Really?
So be very, very careful.
That crystal ball, or is that?
It's nearly 40 years of actually managing money, looking at markets. Nothing ever goes up in a straight line. We're nearly into 11 years of a bull market. By the very nature of what you've just said, SPAC. Look at what's happened with, you know, in Wall Street early this year, whereby suddenly just on sort of social messaging sites, people started bidding up the price of Nokia or, you know, GameStop, and you know, the trouble is that credit is very cheap at the moment, and people have very short memories. And without being too much an old fart, you know, I remember very clearly the '87 crash. No one touched equities for about 2 years. I then remember the Gulf War invasion, the second Gulf War invasion, 2008. It is a natural phenomena for there to be too much exuberance and then to come back down, reset the base, and then off we go again. And at the moment we have 14 companies in the S&P 500 that are net cash positive. The rest are up to their neck in debt. So we've got a situation where interest rates are extremely low. You've seen a massive amount of money being pumped into the economy, and inflation is coming back. Now,
isn't it just transitory? I mean,
yesterday I was talking to someone, and they had just sold a property, been involved in a property transaction, prime commercial property in central London. It went onto the market at 68 million. How much did it sell for within 24 hours? 83.
Wow.
So you're going to see. I believe you'll see inflation. That'll cause interest rates to blip up, and that will then undermine the equity market. Just look at commodity prices. Look at copper. How much copper has gone up in the last year? Crude oil. All these things which people don't necessarily look at, and then they suddenly, with hindsight, say, "Oh yeah, I should have seen that." You know, the European Central Bank has something like 15% of all of the corporate debt in Europe. So if corporates start falling over, that's going to undermine the bank big style.
Yeah, but I mean, this rise in inflation, it has to be transitory. We're still basically at the peak of a very long-term debt cycle. People are just last year we were fighting off deflation, right? So some inflation going from nothing to almost nothing. Is it really something that's going to pull out the rug, or are they going to figure out what to do next?
Well, the central banks they haven't covered themselves in glory over the years, have they? You know, that's just the honest. It's just the reality is, you know, nothing goes on forever. And there's normally a lag of about 18 months from stimulus to actual problems, and we're getting towards the end of that time period. So
I think that also depends on.
Let me just finish. All I'm saying is, if you suddenly saw your pension collapse in value by 30%, tomorrow, what would you do today? And if you're comfortable with that, and you're saying, well, I'm not going to retire for another 30, 40 years, don't worry about it. But if you're coming up to retirement,
retire at this rate. I just,
Well, you know,
I mean, I don't play golf. I don't have any ambitions to
What would you
travel
do
the
with your
world.
time? What would you do with your time?
Just read about startups, the usual stuff, the tech love that I have. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I might do a bit of traveling, but yeah, no, I haven't got any. I don't know. I just think we're the generation that retirement is probably never going to happen.
I can't, you know, unfortunately, my ex-father-in-law died a couple of weeks ago and he was 93. And the week before he died, he was still running his business. Fantastic.
Yeah,
If you
like
enjoy doing what you're, you know, if you enjoy doing what you're doing.
Well, I mean, the other actually interesting point there, because we've had a bit of chatter today about ageism, and we've got all these different subsections like women in tech and LGBT in tech, and there's not really an oldies in tech. I think someone should sort of stand up for the oldies and basically say, like, look, we're experienced, we've been through IPOs, we've been through financial crises, we've worked with big tech founders, we conquered the world. You can learn from us. We're all not like rich and sat on our yacht smoking cigars. Half of us still have to work, or probably even more than half. So I really think there's I think what we will see, and going to the point about retirement, I think oldies in tech will have a revival in the next 5 years, started by this podcast now, I believe. But don't you think there's a point now? It's kind of, there's a lot of people who are going to be out of jobs who are over 50, either this year or next year, because get rid of the old guy or the old girl.
I think they made a movie about this, didn't they? With I think it was Anne Hathaway and Robert De Niro. I don't know if you saw that one.
I can do the De Niro. Yeah.
Internship.
So, Anne Hathaway, you like dressing up in dresses.
You talking to me? You want me to get the coffee?
Well, joke apart, Chris, that's, to be fair, that's why we end up getting involved with a number of different businesses, because sometimes, having a bit of an old fart that's actually, gone through the, I don't know, being involved in a business gone bust, seeing all the nonsense about staff and, the Christmas party and all that sort of stuff. And actually, well, don't worry about it. Look, this is a game. It's not personal. And why don't you look at this, or have you looked at that way? And actually, we end up doing quite a lot of that sort of mentoring and bouncing ideas and say, well, have you looked at this way? Have you considered that way? And that's nothing to do with tech.
That's one of my bugbears, the whole, you're old, you've had a good career, you've worked for lots of big companies. Yes, could you mentor us? What? Me give you loads of really great advice.
But nothing.
All my wisdom. You become even richer when you exit your startup in 3 or 5 years, and I'm left with fuck all. No.
I don't want to take it.
It costs money to get this wisdom, yeah? Sorry, I've just undersold my business a bit there, but it's true, it's kind of like, I hate mentoring. I mean, I always used to get asked by tech stars, like in June by Eamon when he ran it, oh, Chris, it's summer, you're obviously doing nothing. Could you mentor some of our founders for 12 weeks over the summer months, and spend, like, it's about a day a week, we don't expect you to want to be paid. Where's that come from? And you're going to give up your summer holiday that you'd be going away with your kids and your family? No frigging chance, mate. Sling your hook.
But Chris, it's also worse than that. If you pay nothing, you expect nothing. If you pay something, you attach some value to it.
True. That's what we always say. And that's a good point. So you dodged the question on SPACs. You gave us your view of the world financial meltdown again. Have you got a view on SPACs?
Well, yes, there's, as ever, there's good and bad. The equity markets have got a serious problem on their hands, and that is the cost of doing an IPO is just extortionate, and it is still simply an old boys club. And SPACs have gone some way to try and actually shake that tree and make it a lot cheaper and faster to actually launch businesses. But my personal preference is what we're seeing in Germany, in Switzerland, Luxembourg, whereby they're actually getting rid of paper, and they're actually saying, if you want to issue equity, issue debt, do it in a digital format. And it's much, much cheaper and much, much faster. And that will hopefully bring, instead of having to be, really, there's no point going on the stock market unless you're in the UK, at least 200 or 300 million. but that could come down to as little as 50 million. And that makes it really, really interesting, because you can actually reduce the cost considerably. Then you got the whole problem of the conundrum of liquidity and can companies buy or can individuals buy? But if it's there in a much more accessible manner, then that goes a long way to solving that. So SPACs are it's another way of packaging up stuff really quickly. It's mainly a professional sort of play that's going on at the moment. And the money is being taken off of the underwriting banks. They're not being paid basically a great big fat fee for kind of doing nothing, which is what was happening. But you also got to look at Wall Street. Wall Street, and it's interesting, we did something on this a couple of weeks ago for a client, and you look at the West Coast compared to the East Coast, and basically the West Coast is eating Wall Street. And look at the capitalization of, we wrote about it in this week's Digital Bites. Look at the capitalization of PayPal. PayPal is nearly 3 times the size of IBM, nearly 3 times the size in terms of market capitalization of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs. Wow. Square is the same capitalization as Goldman Sachs.
It's mental, isn't it?
Well, it is mental. It is mental. But then you look at, well, what are the banks doing if this digital stuff is going to take out payments, and they don't like lending? And we see helicopter economics or governments giving money directly, so that'll take that role out. Well, you could have the similar sort of thing with mortgages. So what do the banks do? Apart from incur massive money laundering fines every single year.
But, yeah, and that's again go back to, that's why we're going to have another financial crisis.
But if you look at the fantastic success that someone like Tencent have had, and Alibaba, where they started off as an Amazon, a shopping mall. Sorry, these are 2 huge companies in China, for the listeners that aren't aware of them. And now they're a fully integrated financial services business, offering micro loans, insurance, all sorts of stuff.
And I think, in what, 5, probably maybe 5, maybe 10 years, you'll bank with Google, Apple, Facebook, whoever, or there'll be someone new that
Apple have already got 507 million clients using Apple Pay. 507 million.
And teamed up with Merrill Lynch to provide a card.
Yeah. So the next step for them, they will come out with a digital currency.
Yeah.
Or buy a bank.
You don't want to buy a bank. Banks are not.
It's a useless piece of rubbish full of idiots.
Yeah, but you acquire all the customers right off the bat.
But they don't need them. They've got 500 already. And this is why they were so frightened about Facebook. Facebook has 2.3 billion every single month logging on using Facebook. That is, 3 times the population of the G7 economies. 3 times. They're really worried that Facebook get some sort of digital currency. But again, going back to history, in 1863, when the Fed was created in America, there were 8,000 different types of US dollars. And the Fed said, stop. There's going to be one issued by us.
Yeah, and if you wanted to trade from one state to another, there's all that currency stuff. And every state was issuing their own debt as well, which was not clever.
So I do think with the corporate digital currencies coming out, because most of the corporates that could issue them they actually have cash assets behind them, whereas the governments don't. All they do is we promise to pay.
But so Facebook's currency, right? It's a basket of goods behind it.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. So last couple from me, because I think we are running out of time. Are we going to see you on Clubhouse?
What's that?
This big audio app that people go on, generally spout their views. Rishi Sunak was on it this week, so it's kind of cool because Rishi's on it. I know.
Does that make it cool?
An amazing orator like you, Jonny, you would have a massive following. It's an audio channel basically.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, no, I've done it, and people have kindly asked me to speak on it a few times. And do you know, Chris? I personally struggle with. You've got emails. I still get occasional airmails. You get a letter. You get WhatsApp. You get texts. You get Telegram. You get Signal now, because that's meant to be even better than all the rest of them. And it's sometimes, did you see my, like, you know, we were a little bit late for this meeting and I ended up phoning, WhatsApp and emailing. It is really tough for people to keep up just what is the most appropriate way to keep in touch with people. And it's a real mix. I appreciate that, but it is quite tough. But yeah, Clubhouse has done really, really well. I'm not sure how well it will continue once people actually go back to work and can't suddenly take out half an hour in the middle of the day. Or will they really
Sorry, boss, I'm on a really interesting Clubhouse.
Or you're on the train and you're on Clubhouse.
You are over there.
Yeah. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's here to stay and it's going to be super successful.
No,
if you do a Clubhouse, happy to come along and have a chat.
Good luck. Well, I'll bear that in mind. And then the last one, we've talked about different channels. On the telly, what are you watching? Anything?
Oh, I've turned into a Froggy lover. Sorry, not allowed to say Froggy. Well, I'm a roast beef. There we go.
Oh, sorry. Well, they are stopping our supplies of the vaccine. So let's have a little dig.
Well, one of my favourite films is Untouchables. You ever seen it?
No.
Untouchables.
Tell me more. Right.
Fantastic. Based on a true story. A quadriplegic has to basically have a carer. And there's this great big black guy who basically can pick him up and chuck him in a wheelchair and out. And it's a fantastic feel-good film based on a true story, all in French, French with subtitles. So going along that thing, the two things that we've been watching recently is Call My Agent.
Oh yes, love that.
Bit cheesy, acting's not great, but yeah, it's worth watching. And the other one, it's a bit like sort of Sherlock Holmesy. It's not quite real. Is Lupin.
Oh yeah.
But so 3 French films. So we still love the frogs. The frogs love us.
You'll be moving to the to Saint-Tropez soon at this rate with all that.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I had a flat there once. And that was all a bit boring. But no, look, the frogs love us. We love them. We love to hate each other. I was cheering for the French. Don't tell me Welsh next door neighbour. I was cheering for the French last weekend. They got a fantastic rugby club.
So was I.
But their World Cup bloody website is useless. Bloody useless. I spent nearly 4 hours with it. Keep looking. I couldn't get through to get tickets to the World Cup. But hey,
they need the blockchain. On that happy note, thank you, sir.